Hi and good morning everyone, and welcome to our latest how-to webinar for the Northern Affinity. I'm delighted to say that today we are joined by Brenda Etchells, who's going to
Hi everyone, morning.
Brenda's going to talk to us all about strategy, as she does mostly, and how to have an effective strategic planning process. And I think anyone who's run their own business and been through that know how important that is when you are growing and developing and changing, and especially with times we've had over the last year or so, all these different things that are happening. So important to have an effective strategy to work alongside what you do. So if you do have questions as we go through, there's two options really. There's the chat box and there's also a Q&A box as well. So if you want to put them into there, please do. This session is recorded, so I know there'll be a number of people who will watch this session from various platforms afterwards. So if there's questions that you've got that obviously you couldn't answer because you wasn't here live, I'm sure Brenda will be happy to answer them at any time. So we'll put all those details towards the end and contact details. So I'll stop now and I'll hand it over to Brenda. And okay. Hope you all enjoy.
All right then, morning all. Let me just share my screen. Where is it? Where is it? I should have practiced all this bit beforehand. Is it on there? Oh no, maybe bars moved to the top. How did I move it? Oh, there you go. From beginning. Right. Are we there? Can everyone see that? I don't know. I can't even. Yep. I can't see people.
I can see anyway, Brenda. So that's all right.
It's really weird when you can't see people. Okay, so I've positioned this as how to have an effective strategic planning process. So this is more about the end-to-end process rather than developing the strategy itself, because it's one thing having a strategy, but unless you implement it and execute it and communicate it to all your stakeholders, in effect, it's probably not going to be effective. Just some things to note, and I've put a big caution mark here. So firstly, this is an overview. So we'll be going through it quite a sort of breadth of detail, but in quite a sort of shallow context, because I've only got obviously 45 minutes to an hour to go through it. And it's also very much based on my own experience. So 30 years experience in the corporate world and a couple of years experience working with SMEs. Because of that, it's very likely it will have quite a corporate slant and there might be quite a bit of corporate language in there, but I'm going to do my best as we talk through it to make it relevant to everybody. As I said, I can't cover all the elements in detail. Please do ask questions and please do follow up with me afterwards as well if there's anything more you want to know. Okie dokie. So there's going to be three main parts to the webinar this morning. I'm going to take you through basically what is strategic planning kind of as a discipline, and that'll be quite theoretical, that part of the session. I'm then going to take you through my strategic planning process, and I work to 4 different elements. If you Google it, you'll find most people work to 4, 5, sort of 6 parts of the chain, but I sort of narrow it down to 4. And then quite importantly, we're going to look at the pitfalls to avoid. Because I said it's okay having a strategy and it's okay having a process, but there's lots of other things you need to think about to make sure it's effective. So that's going to be the 3 sessions we're going to work through this morning. So what is strategic planning? What have I done for 30 years of my life? Okay. Again, when I was coming up with this presentation, I sort of Googled different explanations and definitions, and I quite like this one. Michael Porter's quite well known in the strategy world. So basically, he says strategic planning is a whole lot of activities, so meetings and communications between leaders of an organization and their employees, but it's basically about having that common understanding regarding the environment that you're operating in and what your response needs to be successful in that environment. And there'll be a whole lot of different tools that are used throughout the process. And I'll take you through some of those tools in the right place when we get to that part of the process. Like any process, it has inputs and it has outputs. So again, this is all Michael Porter's wording. In terms of inputs, the things you need to think about is what actually is it your organization does. And I think also equally importantly is thinking about what it isn't and what it doesn't do. because sometimes you can find yourself kind of going off strategy. So it's a really good checkpoint to stop and think, actually, is this fundamentally what my business does? What is considered value to the customer? There's no point in you having a product or service if it's not valued by your end customer. And what is it they do value about your product or service? What actual product services should be included or excluded? And again, that was linking back to, is this on or off strategy? And what is your geographical scope? Are you working locally? Are you nationally? Are you global? And really key is what differentiates you from your competitors and what differentiates you, importantly, in the eyes of your customers. And then thinking internally about your capabilities and your skills and resources. What do you actually need to be able to give that value to your customer? And actually, those of you who have listened to me talk about the business model canvas will probably recognize that a lot of these questions are what you cover off in the business model canvas. And again, I'm going to cover that a bit later on. So we've talked about inputs and outputs. So those are all the inputs and all the stuff that if you're a business owner on your own, or if you've got a team around you, should be discussing when you're coming up with your strategy. The output of the process tends to be what's called the strategic plan. So when I worked in industry, basically once a year, there was a whole loads of work went on and it culminated in the production of the strategic plan, which was usually a massive document, very detailed, could be even 100 pages long. And it was almost like the Bible, but it wasn't really used to communicate with people. So you kind of had to extract from the strategic plan the key points to communicate to people. So the strategic plan will include the competitive situation, your industry, what's happening in the environment, and there should actually be some clear actions in there as well. Tends to cover multiple years. So we used to write a 5-year plan, but we did then review it annually. So just having a think about that. And as Michael said at the start, actually, in the kind of environment we're in, a 5-year plan is probably way too long. I'd say you're probably talking 3 years maximum, but with a real focus on 1 year right now. Another part of the planning process is measures. You should have some sort of way of measuring and monitoring your progress towards your goals. And a lot of companies use things like KPIs, metrics, balanced scorecards, strategy maps, just another word for a balanced scorecard. But if you're not regularly monitoring your progress, you don't know where you are towards your goals. And a lot of companies build in their financial planning as well into the strategic planning process. So if you're planning to sort of, if one of your plans, I don't know, is to develop new products or new markets, what does that do to your bottom line P&L and balance sheet? So you should be thinking really about the financial impacts of your strategy as well. The final part of the process, according to Porter, is the outcomes. So while you've got your outputs in terms of the strategic plan, the actual tangible outcomes are the results of your actions. What are you actually doing? Now, the outcomes invariably, because things happen in life, will differ from your goal, but how close they are to your goal or how far away will almost determine how successful your strategic plan has been. So it's very unlikely that you're going to effectively 100% of what you say you're going to do is going to happen because competitors get in the way or industry changes or consumers' behavior patterns change, but how close you are determines your success. So that's kind of the theory bit according to Porter. What I like to do with my clients is, because I don't think having a massive business plan or strategic plan, if you're a small business owner, is probably not really of value to you or your stakeholders. So I try to do what I call a plan on a page, really narrow down that whole strategy to 2 pages. So I've borrowed one I did here for a lady who was looking to buy the leasehold for a pub. So basically at the top, we've just got a bit about her purpose, so why she's doing this, what her vision is, what the pub provides. That's in essence the products and services. So that's her on or off strategy. So drinks, food, entertainment, and community. If there was something that came up, it wasn't part of those four, she shouldn't be thinking about doing it. Her areas of focus were getting new customers to come to the pub, increasing her revenue by increasing margins on the products, and just really utilising the stuff that the pub had, like the kitchens and the grounds, in a much more efficient way. And then it was always sort of put in a bit about the value, so the behaviours you want. And then on the second page, we just list the actions under the 3 priority areas with some timescales and ideally some measures as well. So if I was working with you and you were probably a smaller business owner or a solo business owner, we'd come up with something like this rather than a massive strategic plan. So strategic planning: inputs, outputs, measures, and outcomes. I'm now going to try and get a bit more practical, and I'll talk you through sort of my 4 elements of the process. I'm going to guess there's no questions at that stage, so I'll rattle on.
No, I'll find. Oh, so
okay.
There is a question here. So Andy has mentioned. He says he's hopefully he'll going to cover this, but his business model employs subcontractors to deliver. So to what level should we be involving our subbies in the strategic picture for the business?
Okay, yeah, I'll probably cover that off very, very soon. But I'd say if you have a good relationship with them, I would bring them in at the formulation stage, which we're just about to cover. I think as many stakeholders you can bring in to this part of the process, the better the strategy will be and the more aligned your subcontractors and your employees will be. So yeah, absolutely no harm done in bringing in your subcontractors into this stage. Good question, Andy, thank you. Okay, so this is we're now into my strategic planning process. Bear in mind, I'm not a renowned theorist like Michael Porter, but an effective strategic planning articulates where the organisation is going, the actions you need to get there, and importantly, measures to know that you're being successful, or equally measures to know you're not being successful so you can very quickly adapt and change path. It's very much process-based, and it's really important, I think, that it's iterative. There isn't a start point and an end point. You should be continuously going round this loop. So the 4-step process that I follow is we start off with formulation or development of the strategy or the strategic options. Execution, where you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. Impact is when you're monitoring and monitoring the progress and the impact it's having on your bottom line, on your people, on your customers. And then reviewing where you are, what's the environment doing, what your competitors doing, what your customers saying, what your staff saying. And then everything that's outputs of that review process then becomes the inputs to the formulation stage, and you keep going round the loop. So we'll go through each of these stages in turn. Oh, sorry, So just to line it up to Porter, you've got your inputs, your outputs then inform what you're doing, your execution, you're measuring how you're getting on, and then your outcomes are actually what you're doing, and then you review it. So I've just repeated what I've just said, so apologies for that. Right, okay, formulation. I'm just going to have to move the wee box at the top right because it's blocking my words. Okay, so this is probably kind of akin to what Andy was getting at. Key to a successful process is engaging colleagues from across the business, not just the senior team. So I've said colleagues there, but absolutely you can involve external people as well, suppliers. You could even involve customers. The more sort of variety of people you've got involved in this process, the better. But a lot of companies fall down and they have the senior team deciding on the strategy and then telling everybody else what the strategy is, and that's just not effective. So as I've just said, you need to gather as much insight and analysis as possible, really to ensure the choices you're making are evidence-based, again, as much as they can be. So that will include customer research, competitor analysis, and all the external trends, what's happening in the world politically, socially, economically, legally. If you're, depending on what business you're in, there might be a lot of regulation you need to be thinking about. And all that feeds into two very sort of standard strategic planning tools, the PEST and the SWOT. So I'm going to just show you the tools here. I'm not going to go into any depth on them, but it's just so you get a bit of an idea. So the PEST is thinking externally, what's happening externally that could impact on my business. And I always do PEST in a different way. I don't just plot them under PES. So political, economic, social, and technological. And then you've got legal and environmental as well. I think the best way to plot it is the likelihood that this trend is actually going to come to fruition and happen against the impacts it will have on you and your business. So it might be there's a massive, let's take the impact of COVID. It might be to your business, it's not actually got an impact, so it's not something you need to worry about, or potentially it could have a massive impact. So the higher up on the, if the trend is in this top right of this matrix, you really need to be having actions, thinking about what you're going to do to mitigate that and or take advantage of it. The PEST is just a really lovely tool which basically summarizes. So all that external stuff is the opportunities and the threats boxes. Then internally, your capabilities and your skills are the strengths you have to either take advantage of that and or minimize the risk of that. And then the weaknesses is where you're potentially vulnerable and you need to think about how you close that vulnerability gap. It might be you have to recruit somebody with special expertise, have a subcontractor or different things. But so basically the strengths and the weaknesses are your ability to react to the opportunities and the threats. One thing I'm really huge on is not forgetting to tap into your frontline colleagues, because they're the ones that on a day-to-day basis are coming face-to-face with your customers. So they're hearing what the customer is saying. And a really great tool to use here is something called the 4 Actions Framework. And I've used this a lot with branch staff where I used to work in building society. So we got all the branch staff together and ask for their opinions. So basically what you do is you ask your people, what do you think we do that we do well, but we should actually be doing much more of? What do we do that's a bit of a frustration and a sort of bugbear of yours that you think we could do less of? So that tends to be a lot of paperwork and checking and quality assurance processes. What don't we do at all that we should start doing? Where's that sort of innovation spark? What are the customers or your clients saying, if only you did this? What are you hearing them say? And what do? We just need to stop doing it. It's a complete waste of time, of no benefit to anybody, the organisation, and we just need to stop doing it. When I worked, I'm going to keep harping back to when I worked for a building society, but we had a new chief exec come in. And the first thing he did is he went round the whole country and he asked groups of employees these 4 questions. And he basically took all that insight, summarised it up, and that basically gave him his top 10 priorities. As new chief exec, he knew he needed to fix and work on. It wasn't about him coming in with his big ideas. It was about what are people on the ground telling me we need to change? And that drove his initial strategy. So once you've gathered all that insight and the facts, you then need to move on to, well, what are our options? And there'll always be, should be more than one option for how you're going to take your business forward. And this is where the business model canvas is a really great tool for mapping out those potential different future states. Now, again, this is a whole workshop and webinar in itself, so I'm not going to go over this in detail, but basically if you can map out where your business is now and how it could look in the future under different options and different scenarios, it'll start to really give you a picture of the sense of how different your future state is to where you are now and potentially the actions needed to get you there. So you might have, I don't know, you might want to decide you're going to go into new products or new markets or diversify completely or merge with somebody else or buy a business. And all those different things will obviously all have different financial impacts and risks associated. Some may be more doable than others. So then what a good thing to do is use what I call a strategic options grid. So this is where you'd set out however many options you've got. And again, the more people involved in doing this and scoring this, the better. And actually, this would be quite a nice one to bring subcontractors into as well. So think about, is this a strategic fit for my business? If you go back to all those questions at the beginning, does this match fundamentally what we are as a business? Is there a financial benefit to doing this? What is the risk? Are we entering a whole area that we don't really know much about and actually potentially could be really risky? Do we actually have the capabilities and skills to do this? And what will our other stakeholders think about this? So again, if you bring the subcontractors in, that'd be a really good one that they could help you answer. So basically, you score each box out of, I don't know, say out of 5, you add it all up, and ideally the one with the highest number is the option that you should then take forward as your strategy. There's a whole host of other models available, but basically just make sure if you are using any models or tools, understand why you're using it and get the right people in the room doing it with you. So obviously I'm going to say this, but possibly hold a strategic planning day and use a facilitator like me to make sure you're getting the right inputs and you're capturing all the outputs along the way. So that's my little sales pitch there. Okay, we're moving on now. Execution. So by now we should have thought about our options, we've got all our inputs, we've decided this is the strategy we're going for. The best strategy will be let down by bad execution. But as I've said, if you've included colleagues from across the business really early on, they should now be fully on board and understand the rationale behind the strategy. They might not possibly agree with the strategic choice, but they should hopefully understand the reasoning and the logic of why we've got there. Communication is still key to ensure everybody is consistent and aligned. And storytelling is a really great way to communicate strategy. Again, I used to run workshops on storytelling, both in the business and with other businesses. Because what you find is when it comes to communicating strategy, there's a tendency for managers, owners, exec teams to suddenly sort of present you with bullet points. So here's our 5 main priorities. We're going to make sure our customers have, and anyway, it's all very dry and bullet pointy, doesn't bring it alive, it doesn't engage you. And if I was to go across a business and ask people what the strategy is, they probably couldn't tell me. They might manage to mutter some words, but they probably don't really understand it. If you can use storytelling to bring it alive, it is just such a great tool. So there is another whole workshop I run on this, but in effect, I talk to people about the Pixar methodology of storytelling, and it's a really simple 6-sentence structure. And this is great for any communication, your elevator pitch, writing papers, whatever. It's a really great structure to use. So it starts off, as all stories do, once upon a time. Every day something happened. But then one day there was some light bulb moment, something had changed. And because of that change, some actions took place. And because of those actions, there were some key outcomes until finally you've reached your goal. And the more kind of emotion you can bring into it, the more personality, the more parts of somebody's brain you can light up when you're telling that story, the more likely they are to remember it. Now, I've borrowed this from a client that I work with. They're a company called Invisible Creations. And basically they make like grab rails for people that are either disabled or elderly, but they make them like they're just like really nice bits of the furniture. They're like sort of like plant holders. They're really great. Anyway, they bring their product to life through their story. And I've just screenshotted this from their website. And I'm not going to read the story to you, but basically they bring their product alive through telling the story of Sheila. And Sheila's this very, very proud lady who's, you know, very smart, loves her home. But then she gets ill and they come to her house and they put these horrible white plastic grab rails on her house. And suddenly she feels really vulnerable both because she thinks people passing will know there's a vulnerable elderly person living there, but it just makes her feel old and horrible. And she doesn't want to go into her bathroom because it now looks ugly with white plastic things. So she just makes her feel really sort of sad and old and vulnerable. So basically she gets the Invisible Creations lovely silver grab rail that's a nice plant pot, and suddenly she feels proud of her home again. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not we do grab rails, they bring the facts to life through the story of Sheila. So think about it from your try and bring your products to life and your strategy to life through telling a story. Okay, so we've got our high level strategy. Now you need to make sure everybody in your business, what they're doing is aligned to your strategy. And depending on how big your business is, it potentially might be you just wearing different hats. So if you're doing your marketing one day, make sure that's aligned to where you want to be. If you're doing your sales, you've got a sales force, make sure they're aligned. And if you're bigger and you've got different heads off or functions, just make sure all the planning is all lined straight back up to that top level strategy. So I've just put there, so the little thing at the top is in essence your strategic plan. And then if you've got any functional plans or marketing plans or whatever's going on, brand strategies, make sure they're aligned to that top plan. And then ideally, if you've got employees and they've got goals and objectives and performance objectives, make sure they're all aligned as well to the actions that are needed to happen to drive your strategy. And the more top down and across everything is aligned, the more effective your strategy will be. Now, something I have used quite successfully here is what I've called the speed dating concept. You can get all your stakeholders in a room and just sit across from each other for 5 minutes and just to discuss basically what you're both doing, where those interdependencies are, and if there's anything you need to then sort of action and take forward. And then you sort of move around the room. So I did it with about 30 members of a senior team who, quite surprisingly, on a day-to-day basis, wouldn't bother going to talk to each other. They're quite siloed. And so the head of marketing is like, well, I know what I need to do in marketing. The head of sales know what they need to do in sales, but they very rarely spoke to each other. This almost forced them into having a conversation with each other, telling each other what they were doing, and then thinking, oh, actual fact, what I do is going to impact on you. So that's quite important. I engage you in this process. So it's quite effective. I appreciate if you're a small business or a solo business owner, you can't really speed date with yourself. Again, any strategy, don't forget to align it to your change agenda. Again, from experience of working in a larger organization, the whole project and change world was a completely different function and worked under a different director to the strategy function. And again, we didn't really talk very much, which is madness. But basically, whatever you need to drive that change, if it's a big bit of work and it's a project, say, make sure that they are actually doing it. Because it's quite easy for excuses to get in the way, or we've ran out of money, or somebody else shouts louder and something else suddenly takes priority. So just make sure any change that you're doing is being done for the right reason and you don't lose focus on it, because before you know it, your competitor will have done it and beaten you to market. So let's move on to impact. In essence, tends to be what you measure is what gets done. But make sure you're measuring the right thing. So regular assessment and reporting of plans and measures, whether it's just monitoring it yourself to make sure you're on track, or whether you've got somebody else, an accountability partner that can hold you to account for this, but make sure somewhere you've got a regular sort of checkpoint of where you are. And making sure that strategy is having the right impact on the right drivers for your business. Most importantly, is it balanced? And this is where I like to develop balanced scorecards for the businesses I work with. It shouldn't just be about the bottom line. It shouldn't just be about the customers. It shouldn't just be about the employees. it should all be balanced. So there's no point having lots and lots of new customers buying your products if the margin is so low it's not actually making you money. Or whether you're asking too much of your employees to deliver a really high quality of service. So it's just making sure that everything's got a nice sense of balance and your customers are happy, your staff are happy, your bottom line's looking healthy, and you're not really putting yourself at any undue risk. That's exactly what I've just said. And then what you can also find as well is if you're sort of RAG rating it, you can quite quickly see where the issues are arising and kind of amend your actions to rebalance where your organisation is. And that's just a sort of rough outlook of what a balanced scorecard could look like. So we've got financials, customer, people, and risk in that one. Could be anything. It could be processes, could be external trends. You could really put what you like in your scorecard, but keep it quite high level and keep it strategic, and make sure what you decide to measure you can actually measure.
Can I ask a question on that, Brenda?
Yeah, go on.
On the kind of scorecard thing. How important is it in terms of how you position it with, especially if you've got staff, or, you know, using the example Andy used earlier of people who work kind of subcontracting, is that it's not seen as a target or thing to beat someone with if we don't get to certain points. It's more about how it's all aligned, and, you know, how you position that is that's important to start with.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because when I used to work, people used to get completely, like, if something was orange or red, they'd be like, oh my God, and they would start defending it and get really anxious. In actual fact, it's not good. But if something's showing up amber or red, that is right. Okay, I need to think about why that is and put an action in place to make it green. If everything's green, it's a bit like, okay, is this all too easy? Are we not pushing ourselves hard enough? Are we not stretching our resources in the right place? Are we too risk averse?
Yeah.
As long as you're using it to drive actions and not hit people with a stick for it, then yeah.
Yeah, and it's ultimately the responsibility of whether it's the team leader or management or the heads of the business, is if a person in a job isn't hitting a particular target or a scorecard, it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't doing the right job. It's a way to then look at the deeper issues. You know, what is going on? Are they too stretched in their job? Have they not got the resources? Whatever it may be.
Yeah,
it's not about the individual. It's about helping them to do it correctly. Would that be right?
Absolutely. So yeah, if you're not getting the product sales 1 month, it's suddenly gone red. Why is that? Okay, well, the competitors have repriced and we haven't followed, or there's somebody new's entered the market with something newer and shinier. So it's a way to look at what it is you need to go away and think about in action. But yeah, don't use it to don't link people's bonuses or whatever to it. That was yeah. Right, okay, so we're moving on to review. So your strategy should not be cast in stone. Yeah, we need to be agile and adept and fluid, and to use last year's, we're ready to pivot when we need to. It is usual to review your strategy at least annually, if not more frequently, but definitely do it at least once a year. Can depend on how dynamic your market is, and also how often new data is available. So for example, we used to do a lot of competitor analysis, but that was dependent on people producing their annual report and accounts, which they only did once a year. So there will be some stuff you can only do when you've actually got the data to be able to do it. So this stage is gathering both internal and external data. So internally, you'll know your own progress against your actions. You'll know how well your change agenda is happening. Internally, you'll know your own financial data and results. Hopefully, you're doing some sort of customer research, insight, and data, not just about gathering 5-star reviews on Google, but actually really asking your customers what they're thinking, really doing some proper customer research, whether that's focus groups or questionnaires, whatever it is, and making sure you're acting on what they're telling you. what I haven't put there, but I said right at the front, was obviously that employee insight and data as well. Talk to your employees, annual surveys, focus groups, 4 actions frameworks, get out there and speak to them. Competitor analysis, I mean, you could go to town on this, you could do loads and loads of stuff looking at your competitors, but I would tend to just focus on the ones that you feel are potentially the biggest threat to you, or the ones most likely to disrupt you and your strategy. And then look out for industry data and benchmarks. It's a great way to kind of sort of position yourself in your industry. Is what you're doing acceptable? Are your margins about right? Is your customer feedback about right? It's just try and benchmark yourself externally is a really great thing to do strategically. This is just again, another 4x4 matrix. They all look very similar. It's a nice one to do for competitors. Just pick 2 different features. It could be location, price, product range, whether they're online or they've got retail shops, whatever features you choose, and plot your competitors high to low on those 2 axes. This is good to do if you plot yourself as well, to see how you're positioned against your competitors and therefore what your relative strengths and weaknesses are, but also to see if there's any gaps in the market. If there's a lot of white space on here, that's potentially an opportunity to move into that white space because somebody's not filling it. So it might be somebody that's low priced, not in a geographical region. You could potentially position yourself there. So you can use this in a whole host of ways. And again, involve as many people as possible in doing this and the mapping of it. Again, this is one called the customer empathy map, about getting inside the heads of your customers. Again, the more evidence-based this can be from actual customer research and actually talking to customers, the better. But if not, you might just have to make some assumptions. So really just tapping into what your customers are saying about you, what they hear about you from other people. What are they actually seeing when they look at your website, they visit your shop, you go out to visit them, and how is your business making them feel? It's also quite good to think about this in terms of non-customers. What are non-customers hearing about you and saying about you? Are they saying, oh, I don't think she's for me because she's too expensive, or she won't travel to Manchester? So what are the barriers that your non-customers think are in their way from stopping them being your customers? So stop for breath for a second. That's the 4 elements of the process that I would work through with you if I was coming into your business and we were looking at putting in an effective strategic planning process. Just going to move on finally to some of the pitfalls to avoid, because even if you've got your options and you've got your process, it can still all go wrong. So this is really, really interesting. This is from a book that I read called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, which kind of muddled my head for a while. But basically what it's saying is you need to have the right sort of strategy for your business and your industry. Now, obviously they wrote this book before the current massive pandemic, but basically they're sort of looking at how predictable is your industry and how malleable is it? How much can you actually change it and adapt it? So if you're in an industry that's fairly predictable, it doesn't really change and you can't really change it, what they say is your approach should be quite a sort of classical planning approach. So I would say when I worked in financial services, we followed a classical planning approach. And basically it was about being big. It was about being the biggest. You want to be the best by having the most market share. If you're in an industry that's quite predictable, but you actually think you can change it, then you want to be quite visionary. You want to be quite innovative. You want to be first to market with whatever that new thing is. Now, we're all currently in industries that are pretty unpredictable. So you can't predict what's going to happen. If you can't predict it, And also you can't actually change it. You've just got to be able to follow fast and be able to adapt quickly. If it's highly unpredictable, but actually you could probably change it, that's when shaping comes in, and you want to work with others in your industry and be collaborative and try and get that mass and together try and shape the future of your industry. If you're suddenly resources are really constrained and basically it's all gone tits up, you move into renewal mode, and that's really about just remaining viable. So last year, a lot of companies probably moved into that mode and just had to remain viable. But as you come out of that, you then want to start bringing in one of the other strategies. So being viable is not a long-term strategy. That's right, we need to just get through this. And that might mean cutting staff. It might, whatever it needs to do, but we need to do that sharp tactic. Then we're in a position to then start growing and be bigger, first or fast or collaborative. So it's just thinking about, for your industry, what is the right approach? Other places the process can fall down is a lack of focus. So again, if you've not got a very clear strategy that you're communicating to your people, there'll be a lack of focus. People won't really be sure about what they're supposed to be prioritizing or doing. Again, if you're not communicating it well enough, or if you've not involved a lot of people in the formulation, they might not understand what they're doing. They might kind of know what the strategy is, but they don't really understand why. You might have a lack of energy. Again, if you've not communicated it well enough, or if you're putting too much pressure on people, and we think back to what we talked about balanced scorecards and KPIs, you might just not feel enthused or engaged and just not be bothered. Lack of accountability is a big one, especially for us as small business owners or solo business owners. If you've not got that accountability to anybody, you might not have the same levels of energy to try and achieve what you're trying to achieve, because there's kind of not nobody on your back, but there's nobody, you're not answerable to anybody, are you? So if you don't do it, you don't do it. So accountability is a big thing. Lack of flexibility, as I've said, don't cast it in stone, because you need to move as things move. So at that review stage, you've got to be ready to adapt and reshape your strategy. And lack of follow-up. If you're not looking at the impact, if you're not reviewing what you're doing and you're just carrying on, then again, you're not going to be at that ready to have the right inputs for that formulation stage. So do follow up with your employees, do follow up with your customers, follow up with the people that you outsource to, your contractors. So again, that's just some of the things at the different stages in the process that could help, that could make the strategy fall over. And everything there, I think, is really connected to having the right culture. So the kind of final slide I'm going to just show you is going back to those strategies we looked at. So being big, being first, being fast, being collaborative. They all need their own separate cultures to actually allow that strategy to grow and work. So if you're all about having the biggest market share and being the biggest, you do have to be quite disciplined and focused and quite analytical. You have to respect that plan and you need to stick to that plan. But it can be seen as quite bureaucratic. If you're about being first, so that's about being more innovative. It's a bit about us against the world. You're kind of in it together and you're on a mission together. There might be a bit of passion and energy and creativity. And your employees are all about being brand ambassadors for you. They're proud to work there. It's exciting. An individual initiative is encouraged in these sorts of organizations. If you want to be fast, if you want to be able to react and adapt quickly, you need that external focus. You need to be absolutely aware of what's happening in the market. You want that constant generation of new ideas. You want people to challenge each other, a bit of a sense of playfulness, and you're all again driven by that common purpose. So there's no point having a really bureaucratic culture where you're risk averse and you need to have papers signed off by this committee and that committee if you need to be fast to market. You just need to allow your people to take the risks and try things. And if it fails, it fails, and you learn from it and you move on. You don't beat people up for failing at things in that sort of culture. If you want to work with other companies and be collaborative, Northern Affinity, a great example of a collaborative strategy. Again, you need to be externally focused, but you need to be inclusive toward each other's, and you don't think about people as competition. You think of them as collaborators, and you reward your people for reaching beyond the boundaries of your company. So when I used to work for Yorkshire Building Society, I would go and talk to the strategy manager of the Leeds Building Society because we shared the same market issues. So together, you can come up with much more stronger strategies together. And if you're really in that position where it's just about, do you know what, we just need to survive, you're back down to heads down, we just need to do this. Be transparent with your people so you're removing sort of fear and stuff, and really celebrate those small wins in that sort of culture. So I do think culture is huge. For strategy to be effective, you have to have the right culture to match the right strategy for the right market that you're in. Okie dokie, that was the pitfalls to avoid. So there was I went through quite a few tools there, and there's a whole load of tools you can use. And I just wanted to show you. So if you go onto my website, which is brendaetchells.co.uk, at the top right there's an orange button that says Knowledge Club. If you log in or register to be a member, all these tools are in there that you can download, play around with, use for yourself, and or get in touch with me if you want some help in how to use them. Oh gosh, that was a lot. I feel like out of breath. Any questions?
Thank you, Brenda. That was great. And I know for myself, it's something I've spent a lot of time in the last 6 months or so on essentially strategy. And so many things resonate with me there. And I'll go to that in a minute, but I've seen a question from Andy there saying, should the company mission statement or strapline, I guess that includes vision, be part of the strategy?
Okay, so your mission, your purpose is should be quite a constant. That's the reason you exist, and that shouldn't change. So in effect, I'd say that's not part of your strategy, but your strategy needs to be aligned to it. The vision is almost the next level down. So if your mission or purpose is your constant and never changes, your vision is almost like your longer term 5-year goal maybe. So again, is it to be the biggest? Is it to be the best? Whatever that vision is almost your 5-year outlook. And then your strategy is what you're doing to achieve that vision, if that makes sense. So I've always gone mission, vision, strategy.
No, it makes perfect sense because they do feed into each other. Like you said, your kind of overall mission is essentially constant. I guess your vision is probably one of those things that won't change much, but it will evolve over a longer period of time. Whereas potentially your strategy could change quite a lot quite quickly.
Yes. Your vision should ideally stay static for about 3 to 5 years. And it should be quite aspirational as well, because you kind of want people, again, you want people to be energized behind it. But make sure it's clear, because ours used to be the best building society in the blah, blah, whatever it was. Well, best meant different things to different people. So then they changed it to be the most trusted, which was a bit better. But yeah, so have a think about, again, you want people to understand what it is and why it is that.
Yeah, and I think kind of I was touched on it there. My experiences of what I've been doing is that you're never too early. It's never too early to start work on this thing, because strategy, as I touched on earlier, will evolve and will change loads, especially when you're growing and things are changing in the business. But if you put the fundamentals in place, it makes a big difference. And there's certain things I wish I'd have done earlier, but so be it. But I did some things at least, and that's really helped me in the last 6 months. So I think that the earlier you can do it, even if it's just you and you've brand new business and you feel like, well, you can't feel like you can pay yourself to a building society, using that example, of course you can't, but you've got to start somewhere. And actually right at the start is probably the best time to do that, because you can just build on it from there. And as you quite rightly said earlier, Brenda, you just make it evolve and keep revisiting it. You mentioned potentially every year. Potentially, if you look at a small business, that might be every month.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Well, that when I work with my clients, we come up with our plan on a page. We then do monthly progress meetings just to check in every month that you are still online and nothing's changed in the meantime. Because you're right, and again, it gives you that accountability as well. But just picking up what you were saying, I think a lot of people probably do a lot of this stuff. You're probably already thinking about who your competitors are and what your customers are saying about you. So it's probably kind of all there in your head. You're just not maybe articulating it out onto some sort of bit of paper, and that's fine. But I think when you articulate it out, it just gives it more of a sense of, I don't know, get it out your head onto a bit of paper somehow, just formalize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a lot of things, like I said, I've experienced, because I've gone from being the business that was just me to more people now. So then I need to be able to show the people what those visions and those strategy is. So that's really important. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and not just showing them what it is, helping them understand why that's what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't see any more questions unless anyone's got anything they want to put in the chat or the Q&A. But I assume, like I said, Brenda, you mentioned your website that people can access, and people can just contact you, whether it's if you're a Northern Affinity partner, obviously you've got the Mighty Networks platform, or email, LinkedIn, and all that kind of stuff. Would that be right?
Absolutely, please do. Yeah, good to follow up with you. I've not got any idea who's on this webinar, but whoever you are, apart from Andy, please do follow up with me.
Oh, well, we've had quite a few on today, which is great to see, and so that's good, Brenda. Real thank you for your time. I know I've taken a lot. I'm sure everybody else has. So, yes, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.